So yeah, I touched on this, which are the sort of the big questions, or the two questions that I thought we could look at today. When we develop reports and dashboards, there's two things that we need to understand and potentially answer. So the first question is, we create reports for people. There's end users, what we call them, or stakeholders. What do they need to know? You need to be able to understand what is it that they need to know from the data. And then once you understand what it is that they need to know, how can you produce a report that can effectively communicate what they need to know to them so that it's easy to understand, it communicates what they need to know, and then they can use that information to, you know, make a decision or not make a decision, or whatever it is that they need to do with the report that you've developed. I think I've talked a little, talked a little bit about myself, about how I got into this. And one other aspect in my development was dashboard competition. So I went through this process of sort of structured learning and developing my skill set in data analytics. And it's one thing producing reports internally within a company. Because you produce reports internally within a company, it can be difficult for you to share that work or get feedback from external sources, because usually information is confidential, etc. So one tip that I have up front is that if you want to share your work or your reports, or show your development or your progress, there are multiple sort of dashboard or design competitions that are hosted in, you know, LinkedIn and various other platforms, and you can join in, and usually they provide some sort of a data set and potentially a scope or something like that. And then you go away and you develop what you think would be a good report or a dashboard. You submit it and you go up against people from all around the world to see how you fare against them. So I think this is my first one. So if I look at this, how it started, and then this is maybe one of the more recent ones. So the one that I started, it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, working on the Olympics. I think it might have been the Tokyo Olympics at the time. Provided the history of the Olympics since 1896, and the scope was, you know, provide a dashboard to, you know, show the history of the games. And I look back on that now, and you know, you can kind of cringe a little bit, because you see it's got lots of information on there, lots of colors, lots of stories, you know, too much information, etc. But you can go from that to maybe then something on the right within, you know, a couple of years, about sort of honing your skills. How can you remove the noise, remove the clutter from your from the data, focus in on a particular aspect or a particular story within the data, and highlight that using sort of, you know, best practice and design concepts about using things like structure, hierarchy, color, sort of Gestalt principles and things like that. And this sort of taking part in these competitions helped me go from what's on the left to what's in the right. You get to practice and experiment with sort of new techniques and different industries. So I wasn't just working in construction. As you see here, you've got Olympics data, you've got something like Lego that you wouldn't really get to look at in your sort of professional sphere. Then another good part of this is you get feedback. So you get feedback from your peers. So you post this on LinkedIn, you got people who you're connected with, they come in and comment on it. And then you've submitted it to maybe a judging board, and then you've got the professional people that you're working professionally in data analytics. And if you get to the finals, they'll do like a full review of your report, and they'll, you know, it goes on YouTube and things like that. And use it as an opportunity to make connections with other like-minded people and the network. And you can also win things. So yeah, I think I've won 4 or 5 competitions in dashboard design in the last couple of years. And yeah, it's a good place to go and practice and help develop your skills.
I think you've got a unique thing there, that you've got that ability to design and be a data analyst, and I think that's very rare, and probably a challenge that a lot of us face. Following the sort of competitions on the left-hand side there, what was the first end use case that you had for your first real dashboard that you wanted to present, and were there any big lessons that you learned from it? Because I guess the Lego is much more recent, and we've got a gap of 4 years in between the two. Yeah,
like, in terms of these competitions and professionally, if I look at these competitions, and I look at this first one that I did, as you say, there's lots of information on here. It's about, competitor numbers, the development, looking at sort of the West versus communists, looking at different sports, different types of sports, looking at gold medals, silver medals, best athletes, and then having these little logos and stuff. It's almost that it was too widespread, too general, too much information, too many stories competing for each other, too many visuals on the page, not enough structure. You don't know where you should start on this report. Do I start at the top left? Is that the most important, or is there something else? The way it's designed, it's not it's not providing a guide to the reader to say, look at this first, then look at this, then look at this, and then providing that sort of flow of information, like a hierarchy of information. So that's a key lesson that I learned when I look back at this. You need to focus, stay focused, look at a particular aspect of the information, and then produce a report on that particular aspect of the information. There might be other stuff in there that's noise, and you need to push it to the side and focus on what really counts. And then if I come to on the right hand side, then that's kind of where I come from. It's like, you start off, what are we looking at? Lego licensing. We have our first visual here. The one that I want to focus on is licensed, so it's got its own color. Everything else is sort of grayed out. You can see what it is if you really want to, but your focus is drawn to licensed. Then you're being pushed in sort of either one or two directions. You can look at one first and then one at the other. So you've got this sort of flow of information that's sort of leading you through the report, and you're going from high level information, looking at a high level number or a high level sort of graphic, then into more sort of granularity, more detailed information on the right hand side. So those are things that I learned working in these types of competitions professionally. Maybe not a dashboard, so to speak, but maybe a visual representation. Again, working in arbitration, we had to present to like a tribunal of judges, and there was a lot of information on documentation that was being submitted. There may have been millions of documents being submitted, and I think they were having a hard time understanding what it was, the quantum of information, etc. And I came up with the proposal was to visualize this information, have it color coded, produce a document that summarized everything into these sort of summary visuals that they could then look at and view. And we produced that and submitted it to them, and we got very positive feedback from those people, because they were non-technical people, but they wanted to understand something, and having these visualizations, even though they were quite simple, they summarized information, they were focused on what they needed to know, they used the proper use of color and things like that, and it was easy for them to understand and then make a decision to go on. Brilliant. So I think today we were going to look at a little bit at sort of project delivery. I'm sure most people on the call know what project delivery is in sort of in the construction sphere anyway. We want to take a design and construction of a project from its very initiation or its beginning through to its completion and hand over to a client or the public. And within project delivery, there's many aspects and stages. So you have everything from your EPC, engineering, procurement, construction. You've got management, you've got health and safety, maybe you've got approvals and regulations, environmental, logistics. You've got a whole raft of these aspects. And if you ever work in this sphere, reporting is crucial and critical, and it's often required at various different levels. So it can go from the C-suite of a board through to just maybe middle management, and then also operational staff on the ground. And the reports that you create for each of these different groups will be very different. And that's another key sort of learning point, is there's no one size fits all for a dashboard. You can't just create a dashboard and expect it to suit the CEO and the person on the ground. It's not going to, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to produce different reports for different levels of an organization.
Mm.
All right. So if we look at sort of, I just went and Googled project delivery reports, show me a couple of examples. I picked 2 or 3 just as an example. So what might a typical report or dashboard look like? You know, something like this. It might report on something like the numbers of the projects, you know, the number of tasks, the hours that are required, maybe a progress figure or a cost or personnel numbers, etc. And kind of on the face of it, we ask the question, is this sufficient for reporting? After all, this is what it's doing. It's just reporting numbers. And I think that's where some people, they just take the numbers, they put it on a report, and they say, right, I'm done. I've taken the data and I've summarized it, and I've put it on a dashboard. I'm done. But this is where reports can be limited in helping an end user. And you know, why is that? Well, it's often because it's missing context. Context is key when we come to deliver dashboards and reports. And what I actually mean by context, well, context is, you know, it answers the question, you know, so what, or why, or how, or is this good or is this bad? So that's where you need that context. So if we look at this report, for example, if I see progress 40% on project A, is that good or bad? I don't know, because this report doesn't tell me whether it's good or bad. It just tells me there's 40% progress. Now, was it planned to be 50% progress? No, so it's behind schedule. Or was it planned to be 20% progress? So it's way ahead of schedule. Because we don't have that context here, it's not actually telling an end user a whole lot. There's not a lot of information here. And
so with this example, what are you missing? Are you missing the data, or are you missing the end use case from the stakeholder?
I would say because we have things like planned and actual hours, you would potentially assume that they would be able to calculate a planned and actual progress requirement. So you would want to show against the baseline. So if your progress, you want to know if your progress is ahead or behind schedule. So missing that sort of context here, the end user isn't able to understand, like, you know, how are we actually performing in terms of our progress. I don't know how we're performing. The planned and actual hours you can maybe see at a glance, but you need to go through and look at this, and you're manually having to deduct the number of hours here and see, you know, how far are we behind, you know, how many hours are we behind and things like that. It becomes more difficult, and you're requiring your end user to, I don't want to say use their brain, but they haven't to engage themselves to sort of, you know, understand what it is. And that's not what dashboards are about. Your end users shouldn't have to make a concerted effort to understand what you've produced. You should be taking the information to them so that they can understand it quite easily, rather than making them try to work it out for themselves.
Are there typically a number of iterations you'll go through, therefore? So you would present this example. I know you just Googled this as just a tiny example. Would you present this to them and wait for the second order questions to come back and then go and rebuild the dashboard?
No. That's where you can waste a lot of time and money, and that's where you'll find there's a lot of dashboards that are sitting gathering cobwebs in a workspace somewhere because people don't want to use them. And if you produce, I find if you produce something like this to an end user, you can lose credibility because they think this person doesn't understand what I want. So before you get to this stage, because this is when you get to this stage, it means that you've gathered your data, you've created your model, you've created your measures, your metrics, your report. You've gone very, very far down the line. What you want to do is pull it way, 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 way back and discuss upfront with the stakeholder. Do you need to see plan versus actual progress on your reports? What constitutes good progress? Do we need to be 5% ahead of actual in order for it to be highlighted as good? Or is there a tolerance level? And then on the opposite, if we're 0.5% behind progress, is that bad, or is there a tolerance level that's acceptable to you? So it's defining those criteria and KPIs up front with the client before you go in to actually build a report like this. You can sketch something up on a piece of paper. That's one of my tips. Is you can spend a lot of time. You could go away and spend days, weeks, potentially months in developing a report like this on a tool because they're quite labor intensive. Pencil and a piece of paper and you sketch it is the easiest thing you can do. It takes 15 minutes. You can show it to a client. If they don't like it, you can throw it in the bin. You've only wasted 15 minutes. You haven't wasted 3 weeks developing something. Or, that's one end of the spectrum. You can spend 15 minutes, or, you can use a tool like Figma or something like that, or Canva to develop something in an hour or two to show to a client.
Yeah, that's very useful because we'll talk about that maybe when we run our next hackathon in October, because a lot of people then just run straight into a dashboard like this instead of actually going back. So that's a useful tip. Thank you. I'm talking a little bit too much because I know you've got a lot more slides and time is running away with us. We're already halfway through. So apologies for asking that question earlier.
No problem. No problem. I'll just show one or two more examples. And this is another example. And maybe some people, when they see something like this, initially when they see it, they're like, "Oh, wow, this is well, maybe not everyone, but some people will look at this and they'll say, "Oh, wow, this looks great. There's a lot of stuff, information here. Someone spent a lot of time developing this. There's lots of colors, lots of stuff going on. This must be great." But I think after a few minutes, when you're actually looking at it, there's a lot of mental overload here. It's like, where do we start? What is it that what is it? It's construction dashboard. What is it actually communicating to us? It's difficult to know where I should look first. What does everything mean? There's too much information. There's a lot of stuff like here about your on-time completion, quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. Why are they using different colors? Did the colors mean something? And then you're going looking somewhere else and, oh, this is orange here. It's orange up here. Are these connected? I don't know. Is this blue connected to this? And you get distracted, and you lose sort of concentration. You don't know you don't know where you're looking or what you should be looking at, or it's difficult to know what things mean. So again, this is one of those things that people see it at first and they think this looks actually quite good, but once you start looking at it for a few more minutes and looking to see what it's actually telling you, it's not a good example of a report. And then this final one, I actually prefer this to the previous one, even though the previous one might look nicer. This one actually has, if you look at it, there's information in here about sort of planned progress, actual progress. There's SPI, the SPI trends, sort of earned value versus planned value. So there's a lot of stuff in here about what you would actually measure in project delivery. But the problem here is more about the structure and the layout. So it's kind of a bit sort of, I'm just throwing charts on here because they're fitting in here and seeing where they fit. And if it fits somewhere else, I'll stick it down there. There's no flow of information in here. We're not highlighting what's the most important thing on this chart. What is it? This planned progress? I'm not sure, because People like these things like these gauge charts, but they take up a lot of information. And what is it you're actually doing? It says 14% overall progress against the plan of 18. That's what you want to know. This radial chart with all these colors and lines and dials and stuff, that's a distraction and noise. It's taking up space on your dashboard that could be used to do more important things. So there's things like that you've got this information, you've got the measures and the components of a report hiding in the background here. It needs someone to go in and say, well, what are the key points in this report that you actually want to communicate with the end user, and then focus on those and push everything push everything else out of the report.
So I hope we're going to get to how to do it better.
Yes. So how can we achieve a better outcome? All right. Okay, here's where it starts. All right. So before I go into my approach, I just want to talk about kind of the skill set, what you might want to call like a unicorn skill set of a data analyst who can produce, can develop and produce reports and create useful reports that an end user will like and use. So there's sort of three aspects here. You've got your analytical, your UI, UX, and your visualization. So your analytical comes from your kind of your technical knowledge. This is where you're developing your understanding of business intelligence, data architecture, analytics, and your business intelligence tools like Power BI, Tableau, etc. This is where you're sort of learning in some sort of structured environment, whether it's through courses, through platforms, through technical college, or through an online platform like yourselves, where you have a sort of structured path to learn various tools and techniques related to business intelligence, giving you that sort of background knowledge on how you perform analytics. Then the next is sort of UI, user interface, and UX, user experience. So this is how can you design and structure a report to make it appealing and to enable you to communicate with an end user. You've got things like cognitive science, which I'll briefly touch on a little bit later, about understanding how we understand things. How should we group visuals? How should we separate them? How the brain works when it's interpreting, numbers or colors or visuals and things like that. Developing prototypes. How do we develop prototypes in the reports that we develop? And then things like color theory. Again, I'll briefly touch on that together with this sort of cognitive science about how we can purposefully use color. So we don't just use color just for the sake of using color. If I go back to my first dashboard where I had 12 different colors on a page, some of them meant something, but they kind of got blurred with everything, so they didn't really mean anything. And if I compare it to the sort of the Lego one, where I used this sort of yellow color and then sort of shades of that yellow to actually mean something. And then we've got visualization. So storytelling, it's a key sort of buzzword around reports about developing a narrative, a structured narrative, going from sort of high level down to sort of granular level. The use of appropriate visuals. There's lots of tools out there, or lots of platforms out there that will show you the types of visuals you can use depending on the data that you're using, whether it's time series or you're doing comparative, etc. And then just the best practice that we can learn. All right. So on to my approach. So this is the kind of the approach that I use, and this forms the sort of the two questions that I used about, what does a stakeholder need to know, and then how can we develop a report to effectively communicate that with them. So my approach is to start with the end in mind. So the end in mind is your report. So what is it that you need to show in your report? Then you go back to the start. All right. So where do you go back to the start? You go back to the start here with your stakeholders. So this is where you need to use what people call sort of soft skills in dealing with sort of end users and stakeholders. I tend to call it empathy. So it's having an understanding of what your end user needs to know, and this is where sort of industry or domain knowledge can help. So if there's people on the call or have knowledge in an industry that's not data analytics, that's a positive from my perspective. I've often heard people say that it's easier to teach someone with domain expertise data analysis than to teach a data analyst to be a domain expert. So if I talk about project delivery or project management, I worked 10, 15 years in sort of engineering delivery, construction management. So I understand what are the key components, what do we need to measure and report against. So if I talk to a construction manager or a project manager about developing reports, I can kind of understand or know what questions to ask about what is it that they need to see. I can kind of understand what they're talking about, and I can kind of delve in and see the things that they want. And this is where we develop the knowledge of the context that the stakeholder needs to know. So what is it they want to do? They want to measure against some sort of a benchmark. Is there some comparison against previous projects? They want to compare it over time, month over month, quarter over quarter. Do they want to measure against plan versus actual, et cetera, et cetera? So that's my approach, is to develop that relationship with the stakeholder to then understand what is the function of the report. Once you understand what the key function of the report is, it makes everything here where you're creating the report much easier. There's less guesswork. You may not then necessarily need to collect all the data for everything. You now know you're kind of focused on what you need to produce, so you only need to go in and select a portion of the data and then create your sort of very focused model, your focus measures, and then you develop your focus report. So you're kind of streamlining and shortening your sort of turnaround time. You have this upfront work in developing what the stakeholder wants, and then you save a lot of time, a lot of iterations and repetition with the client later on.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But yeah, this is kind of probably a bit of an expansion on what I just discussed there about, what do your end users need to know? So you want to understand the objectives and the context. You want to define the scope. So the scope is important. What is it? What's your dashboard going to be called? Is it monthly progress report, or is it daily? I don't know, some sort of a daily report that your operational team needs, and then define that scope and the stakeholders, and then understanding the needs and the analysis requirements, and then obviously you need to understand how much money you've got to spend to develop it, and when it needs to be delivered. And then for example, the questions that you might want to ask, what are the primary goals and objectives? So I've underlined primary because a lot of times stakeholders will have potentially, they might think I've got lots and lots of things I want to see. But again, talking about focus, you want to focus in on the primary goals and objectives, and you build your report against that. Things like how can we convince stakeholders to take action? So what are the metrics? What would influence a stakeholder to take action? Is there some measurement or some tolerance within that you go outside that tolerance, and the stakeholder is going to take an action? And that's developing your tolerances, how you're going to flag up that there's an issue going on here.
I know you're going to talk a little bit more about things like metrics a bit further on. I'm just aware of the time, just to give a bit of time for Q&A at the end, Gerard. So just keep an eye out on that.
Yeah, no problem. I'll go through this. And this is a bit of a funny one, where I say that you need to stay focused. So bit of caution about designing by committee. If you've got too many stakeholders in taking part in this. It can lead to reports that are, they're over complex. There's too much information in them. They're unwieldy because they've just got pages and pages of reports. They're very high maintenance. This is something that you don't think about up front, but if you've got lots and lots of stuff going on and lots of interactions and all sorts of stuff, you need to maintain that long term. Multiple points of failure. If you've got multiple data sources and you've got multiple sort of transformations and metrics and things like that, there's more things that can go wrong to make your report fall over. So again, you want to keep it simple. And looking at this sort of iPhone prototype here, you'll find that there might be one thing in here that one person might use, but most of the time, most of the options will probably never be used or will be used very infrequently. So they're not worth the effort to include them in the report. And overall, if you consider everything, that can lead to poor adoption of the reports. So yes, so what I spoke about there previously, there's different people who need different reports. So then create the reports for those specific groups of people rather than creating one report that feeds everyone. And then effectively communicating.
Sorry, Gerard, there's one question which came up during that slide on how important is value theory in addressing the various concerns of project stakeholders.
When you talk about value theory?
Someone, Alex, has said, how important is value theory? No, sure don't worry. Let's move on.
Effectively communicating. So again, I think I've touched on this about everything that you've recorded or documented from question one in terms of your stakeholder engagement. You should have that fully documented, hopefully in a formal document. And that then influences everything you do in question two. So how you transform your data, what information you're pulling in, how you transform those tables, how you build your model, how you build the measures, and then eventually the end report. All of that influences what you've done or what you're going to produce. And then if we consider this, we have our transformation model and measures. These are things that most end users don't see, even though they're a very important part of the process. The real kind of piece that your end user will see is actually just the report. And the development of a report could be discussed for hours in its own right, including developing prototypes and themes and visuals, etc. I'll look at that in the next few slides.
Have you come across situations where the stakeholder or customer doesn't know exactly what they want, and how do you go about breaking down a dashboard to still appeal?
Yes, most of the you find a lot of the times, I'm sure lots of people on the call will find this, a lot of stakeholders don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want. So if you show something to them, they'll say, yeah, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that. And then you'll produce something and they'll say, oh, I like that. But they aren't effectively able to communicate upfront what it is that they want to see. So again, within KBR, and I'm sure most organizations, we have sort of like a structured sort of questionnaire or prompts that we can use, where you can start asking specific questions about, what type of decisions do they make on a day-to-day basis, what type of information do they use, and things like that. And if you have that sort of industry insight or domain knowledge, you can kind of have that discussion, and you can kind of guide them or help them sort of write down or sort of annotate what is it the information. So you can go through that process, and I think it's worthwhile upfront, even if you're spending a little bit extra time, even if you're spending a couple of hours or a day or something chatting to them about this. It saves so much time later down the track. you may not produce at the end something that's 100% what they're required, but it'll be very, very close. So it'll only maybe require a few tweaks or a few adjustments rather than going through the iteration of producing, you know, lots and lots of different types of reports. Yeah. So yeah, if I look at this as an example, this is just sort of dummy data for a technology company for sales data. The scope of this project was provide a quarterly report that give information on individual managers and the team performance and show how they're performing against other teams. And here we sort of took that information, defined the structure, the metrics, the context, and the level of detail. And we came up with this type of structured report where we have developed what was important in terms of the KPIs. So business KPIs for sales about wins, win percentages, you know, the days to close, your sales value, and then your variance from your retail price and things like that. So sort of key business metrics. And then looking at things like all regions, your performance of your team region, and then having that little bit of context, you know, how you're performing against all regions for your region, and then your individual team, how again are you performing against all regions against your team region. So having that information that managers can then come in and see how are my team performing against our region, against everyone, and then individually then within my team, I can sort of drill down and see how are each of my team members performing, who's good, who's bad, who's indifferent, etc.
I'd like to leave time for you to show us some of that dummy live data as well, please, Gerard. That would be amazing.
I'll skip through some of this stuff, the data and the structure again, typical models in the background, just trying to follow best practice and sort of one-to-many relationships, developing these efficient models that allow for scalability and, you know, as you go along. Then developing metrics. So again, we develop these sort of metrics and sort of the measures and what we want to show. Is it, you know, our number of wins against the region quarter over quarter. So these metrics, and then we do that for wins, and then we repeat it for percentage wins, average days to complete, sales, price variance. So we have this structure of measures that we can kind of almost, you know, copy and paste, and then just basically look at a different metric. So it's kind of consistent how we build these. And again, create a new dashboard on sales information. Again, it's easy then to turn around and replicate it because it's something you've done before. And just on this about looking at the report. So yeah, developing a sketch or a prototype. So I would have just developed this hand sketch of something like this. Then I want all regions and the metrics. And I want a team region with some context. So again, 5 minutes to develop a prototype. We look at the hierarchy. So you have it's consistent report. You're going from the top level, all regions, team region, overview. So you're going from your highest level down to your most granular level, highest granular. So you have this sort of top-down approach, using appropriate visuals, nothing too complex. You don't want to overcomplicate what you're showing. People understand numbers. People understand bar charts. Don't go producing, you know, weird chord charts or chord diagrams and stuff like that just because they look fancy. Produce stuff that people want to see or people can understand. And then also then use of context, color, and gestalt principles. But there's another thing that people need to consider. It's what are called pre-attentive attributes. So again, where I was talking about cognitive science and color theory. So we've got this thing called iconic memory. It's shorter than short-term memory, and it's used for processing information very quickly. So once your eye sees it, it goes through. And your brain also has something called cognitive load, and it's related to the amount of information that you can hold at one time. So your reports need to limit the amount of stimulus so that only the most important information goes through to the brain. Everything else that is not important doesn't go through. The noise needs to go out. So just as an example, a little game. If I look at these numbers and I give you 5-10 seconds to tell me how many 9s are in here, it can be quite difficult to count them all up, right? Because it's difficult you have to manually go through and see what it is. Now, if I say how many 9s are there,
Much easier.
It's a little bit easier because, you know, they are highlighted, but everything else, other things are highlighted too. And that's kind of where I come to these dashboards where there's lots of colors and they're all competing for each other. Now, if I go to this one and I say, how many 9s are there now?
Yeah.
It's much easier because they're focused and you're using one color for 9s. That's where you come to this report where you're more focused in your colors. You know that sort of, you know, the red's drawing your eye to a red or a green or something like that. There's not lots and lots of different, each bar doesn't have its own color and things like that. So yeah.
We've got one of the attendees who said the same sort of thing. As a data analyst, we're tempted to make flashy dashboard reports. The project dashboard is for project manager, delivery managers who need to do the work completed. I made a flashy dashboard, but it wasn't really used in the end. And I learned that simply what they want to know on the dashboard report is best, even though the report doesn't look cool.
Yes, I've had very recently producing a logistics report, and you know, one person, they wanted, you know, bar charts showing handover of plots and things like that, and they wanted to have donut charts and all sorts of other stuff and maps and things like that. And then a key stakeholder came back, the client said, I don't understand any of these charts and visuals. I'm a numbers person. Give me a dashboard that just has the numbers. So a matrix of numbers. He wanted to know, you know, how many plots do we have? What's been handed over? You know, the progress, just the numbers only, and produce a report like that. So you have to deal with, again, this comes through stakeholder engagement about understanding data literacy. Some people understand, you know, they're experienced in looking at charts and graphs and things every day, so they understand them. Other people, not so much. They don't, you know, they find it difficult to read, you know, a pie chart or something like that.
I've got a couple of questions which have sort of come in related to that. Again, hopefully we've got time to come to your dummy data. One of them is asking, have you got any tips for presenting more qualitative information? And the other one is, how do you go about designing reports where the data set is likely to change, be it a survey that's still collecting responses or a project schedule that is updated each month? How does this affect how you tell the story of the data?
Yeah, so I can show you, so project schedule. So this is, let's say, a dummy data for a portfolio of projects. So we can create, this is taking Primavera or P6 data into Power BI and transforming it, and then almost recreating parts of the schedule or summarizing parts of the schedule for particular projects. So we can say, if we have a portfolio of projects, again, if I look at it at an asset level, so let's say we have a portfolio of projects and we got 34 projects, we can have our forecast and baseline timelines in here. And if I look at sort of all our assets, this project has 34 projects within it. We have what we call sort of RAG status, red, amber, green, in terms of delays, whether it's greater than 90 days, 30 to 90 days, or less than 30 days. So you got 34 projects, 21 are well behind schedule, 3 just behind, and 10 on target. And then if we have different asset types, you know, if it's a strategic asset, support, hotels, etc., we have these number of projects. And if we have a timeline over 8 years, and we see when they're going to be developed, we can show that. But this is kind of giving the overall asset overview at a high level. If we want to look at a project stage, we can look at an individual project. We say, what's that project forecast completion date? What's the status on the completion? You know, is it red, amber, green? Some project details. If we want to look at progress percentages, schedule versus actual, and then our variance. If we want to look at upcoming stages, what's the next stage for completion? You know, when's it going to be completed? What's the status of that? And then we want to look at our stages of our project for, you know, we want to look at baseline, start and finish, actual start and finish, what our variance is. So we showed the gray as our baseline, and then our actual is colored, and then the color of the actual tells you whether it's, you know, the delay status, whether it's ahead or behind schedule. Again, yeah, on the bottom here we have, you know, our delay or whether it's been completed. So this gives us an indication of where we're looking at, and we can go between this and different projects, so we can see which projects are how they're performing against the baseline. And again, you can maybe look at this one and you say, our design seems to be delayed, but we seem to be looking at everything else is going to be still either ahead of schedule. That might be an issue for us. That doesn't look right. And then you can go then and further investigate it. And in terms of developing a dashboard for data that changes, this is something that we use in the field where typically you get a P6 every month. And we would set it up that your source data is the P6 for, let's say, June 2024. And then when it updates for the next month, let's say July 2024, we can switch over. And because it's a same data structure, your reports automatically update. So we can accommodate sort of cyclical or updated information or updated data. It could be on a daily basis, a monthly basis, weekly basis.
Do you use Vega for custom visuals?
Yes. So this one, yes. So I use Deneb or Vega Lite for things like this. Normally, I tend just to use basic visuals. Whatever's out of the box within something like Power BI. Just use line charts, bar charts. That's like 90% or 95% of what I would use. It's only in very specific circumstances where a client says, I need to see a Gantt chart or something like that, then we might go away and produce something like this, a bit more bespoke. And again, if we wanted then to look at it at an even more detailed stage, we can then go into individual sort of activities and see, okay, if we said our design, there's issues with our design, why is what's happening with design, and we can go in here and say that all our approvals are being delayed. So you can come in here and see what's the problem, and then maybe that points to an issue with getting client approvals for your design or something like that. So then someone can go in and start chasing a client maybe to get approvals.
Amazing. Gerard, I'm just looking at the time. I think we have almost run out of time, really, because I do need to just make sure that we finish on time. Do you want to go through this one as well? Because I think seeing these live dummy reports you've got are really great just to talk us through it. So do you want to just have a minute or so on this one?
Yeah, again, something like contract procurement. If you need to provide a procurement status report, let's say you've got different stages of your procurement, whether it's RFPs or a tender return or an evaluation or your contract awards, you need a status. If you've got a plan versus if you've got a plan in place for the year or like a forecast, and then you want to measure that against the actuals, again, you develop these sort of, they're not very complex metrics, but you got your actual RFPs and what was your forecast, and then you want to highlight what's your variance. So again, you're just highlighting within these, you're just highlighting what's the variance. Are we ahead or behind your forecast or your plan? And again, it can kind of show you sort of the trend. So it gives you this high level information at the top, gives you sort of straight numbers and variance. And then if you want to see a little bit more detail in the cumulative numbers over the year, it gives you that kind of overall trend. So it gives you that little bit, a level deeper in terms of the information. So again, you're going your hierarchy, going from top level down to here. And then if you want to then go down into, a month by month, what is our plan versus forecast? How are we performing? Are we ahead or behind? So if this is our, this blue line, which is again, using consistent color where your blue is your forecast and blue here is the forecast, and whether
Gerard,
we're ahead.
I'm going to have to jump in there. I'm just because it is past. I just want to mention on the basis of this, for anyone who wants to come and play around with visualization and an awful lot more, we have got a hack that is being hosted by Rolls-Royce in Derby on the 22nd, 23rd of October, and Erin will put into the chat a link where you can come and sign up to that and come and join in with other people. Also, Erin will put a link to all of our events, because we've got our apprenticeship programs, our level 4, and we've just started a level 7 apprenticeship program specifically on data analysis. And if you'd like to come and attend one of those, please just have a look at them. You can sign up from the website, or just let us know. And Erin will also just put our email address of inquiries at Projecting Success. So that's the hour over. And Gerard, on behalf of everyone who was on the call, can I please just thank you very much indeed? I think Martin wants to unmute and say something. Martin, did you want to say something? Maybe Martin doesn't want to say something, or Erin's not going to let him say something.
Unmuted now.
Martin, are you there?
Absolutely superb, Gerard. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Loads of great insights. I think you are just a unicorn yourself. You know, what you're doing is far beyond what a lot of other people do. So excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for staying up late as well. So appreciate it.
No, it's not too late. It's not too late. It's okay.
Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Gerard.
Gerard, thank you very much indeed. Erin, thank you for hosting it. And thank you, everybody, for coming along.